زود علي يا مزهر الأجوائد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا مولانا حبيب الله العالمين أبو القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على القوم الظالمين من الآن إلى يوم الدين. وبعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum to all of you. Let me see what we've got here in the thing. Assalam to all of you guys. Thank you so much for being here. There's like so much going on today and people are in different time zones that for some people it's Eid. So for them, you know, Mubarak. Some people it's still Atif Arafah. So for you, remember in dua. Some people are doing majalis for Hazrat Muslim bin Aqil for the day that he, or actually it sets into motion what would happen at Ashura and what today is the day of Hazrat Muslims leaving and his martyrdom. And so some people are in majlis, so they can't make it. So we hope they pray for us. So there's lots of house. I don't want to give like a general message to anyone. I don't want to say Mubarak. I don't want to say condolences. I don't want to say pray for me. But in general, thank you for being here, irrespective of what's happening in your times and in your area. And I pray that today's session, inshallah, is somehow useful or beneficial for what you're going through, especially if you're coming to days of dua. Hope today's topic is beneficial for that. Or similarly, if you're going to do remember the awliya of Allah who have passed away. I hope this today's book club, you know, allows you to contextualize what people have going through and what maqamat people can reach. And I say that because today's book club is on the topic of abstinence, zuhd, and it links closely to irfan. These topics are really important and part of our tradition and should be dealt with in a certain way. Imam Ali alayhi salam in Nahjal Balagha speaks a lot about the idea of abstaining from this dunya, abstaining from the pleasures of this world, abstaining from keeping yourself too high or honorable to commit sins, right? And in Nahj Balagha, we see many examples of the Imam pointing at attachment to dunya or this sin or the wrong leader, at problems people have because they are not abstaining from these pleasures which are taking them away from God. And like we mentioned before, dunya and love of this world is one of the most important themes which the Imam is trying to mention, that why that's a problem for us, you know, to live in such a life that we are so thoroughly attached to this dunya that we no longer are seeking our true ultimate goal, which is Allah Azza wa Jal. Now in that spirit is our sessions on moral decision making. And in deciding what is right and wrong, or in trying to do what is right and wrong, we have to clear our minds from forces that would make biased our choices, that would pull us towards one thing or another thing and not help us to make just clear, honest, true, rational decisions. And one of the things which does pull us away from making the right choices and following our religion is this love of this world, is dunya. So at some level, we have to abstain from this dunya. But the problem is we can't go too far. We can't go too far. Well, hang on, we can't go too little, because if we don't abstain enough, then we'll find ourselves doing things for the sake of this world and not for Allah. We get that. We can't go too far if we are trying to stay away from this dunya so much and abstain from this world so much, we forget our responsibility to each other. That I'm going to run away and hide somewhere in some cave and you won't see me again and I'll have a relationship with Allah as well, and that's the end of me. No, I have to maintain some sort of social responsibility, which Islam wants us. So how do we get it right? How do we know how to abstain in the right way, in the right form, in our environment? And Nahjal Balagha is a very good resource for this. It's a beautiful resource. Tell us what that's like. Now, to have a discussion on this, I'm going to turn to the words of Shahid Mutahari, Aislam Mutahari, who in discussing this topic, he doesn't number them. He mentions different steps, but I've numbered them into 7. 7 steps according to Nahjal Balagha, how the individual learns to go from living in a material world to abstaining the material world for the sake of God in a practical way. And these 7 steps, although he puts them in different places, somehow represents a feeling all of us are going through. And within those 7 steps is the sermon that we're looking at today, which is 209, in which the Imam speaks to Ala bin Ziyad al-Harith, one of the companions, who mentions an important dialogue in one of these 7 steps. But I'm going to start before. I'm going to put our situation into context, and then we're going to come to that point. But if you are following along and you're taking notes, Sermon 209 is the one that we set for today. Okay? And now what I'll do is after each step, I'll pause and I'll ask you for any reflections or thoughts that you might have. I'll make sure that we're doing it in a sequence. But let's begin. How do me and you, practically get to a level where We are abstaining from this dunya and not living for it in a way that ends with us doing exactly what the Imam wants us to do, which is to be useful to society, but still with God. A few weeks ago, we looked at one of the hadith where the Imam says the true followers, the true believers, they walk around like anyone else, but their hearts are already with Allah. I want to be like that. How do I get there? Step one, Shaykh Mutahri says, in step one, and see if you identify, you enjoy physical pleasures, but you realize there's a series of spiritual needs not being met by this world. Anyone feel that is describe something they've gone through? You enjoy physical pleasure in this world, but you realize in yourself there are a series of spiritual needs that are just not being met by this world. So this world might have certain pleasures which are natural for our bodies, or it might have certain attractions which are normal, and we involuntarily want them. You know, in the way that a child wants that which is sweet and stays away from that which is heat. Like it's natural, but we realize something. If I live a life chasing this physical pleasure, I'm missing out on something, some emptiness inside that's not being filled by the physical world. And we need reminders sometimes, but clearly there's a difference, that there's a part of me that is just not happy and not satisfied with that kind of pleasure. This is hinted to us in a story by Sa'di. Sa'di is a famous Persian poet. In his Guldastan, in his collection of poems, he mentions a story, a fable, in which there are two sons burying their fathers. Okay, one son is very rich, and his father died a rich man, and his grave is covered in marble and precious stones. And the other son is buried his father, who's buried in a grave of dirt, and only a handful of other dirt is applied on his grave, and nothing more. So the rich one says to the young one, "Look at you, look at you. Look at the state of my father and the way that he's been buried, and look at the state of your father and the way that he's been buried." So the son of the poor man, who was an ascetic, who was a man who abstained from this world, says that whilst your father's is being crushed under the marble of his tomb, my father will have reached Jannah already. So here there's a difference, that the physical world and marbles and pleasure and all those things, they don't serve a certain purpose which feels spiritual. Okay. So step one is, we all of us enjoy the physical world, but we realize it's not enough for us. Let me pause here. Is anyone who identifies with step one, or who would like to say that yes, that it makes sense, like they relate to what this step is, or they want to share any questions about this so far? Who gets step one? Who knows what it feels to be in that position where the physical material world is just not enough for a voice inside of you? Anyone who identifies with that? Maybe you guys want to step two already, mashallah. Like it says Zahra for sure. Okay, good. Well, maybe step two. So step two is your soul. So what's step one? This physical world's not enough for you. Step two, your soul realizes that its source of pleasure is not the same as for your body. So the soul then recognizes that the very same things which make this body happy aren't what make me happy. And now you recognize yourself more, where you see the soul as an independent thing which actually exists inside of you. And even though it's fused with the body, it's something separate. And what's the proof of it? It's not happy with certain pleasure which the body's happy with. There's a proof that it exists, but it's independent. And you start seeing it as a separate thing to your body, even though they appear together as one. Now, about this, Imam Ali alayhi salam has two very useful definitions for how you then decide to abstain from the physical pleasures. So, what's step for you at? Your soul's not your body, your will is not a body, and you want to stay away from certain things which just don't make you happy anymore. Something else makes you happy. In Sermon 81, the Imam alayhi salam describes and defines for us what zuhd is. Zuhd means abstinence. What does the Imam say? He says, Ya ayyuhan nas, oh people, الزاحدة قصر العمل. It is to shorten your desires, abstinence. Have short desires. والشكر عند النعمة, and be thankful whenever you receive a ni'mah from Allah. والورع عند المحرم, and stay away from that which is haram. Stay away from that which is prohibited, which is forbidden. فإن غرب ذلك, and if that's not possible for you, فلا يغلب أحرام صبركم, at least stay away from as much haram as you can, which doesn't take away your sabr, your patience. ولا تنسوا عند النعم شكركم, and don't forget to be grateful when Allah gives you some ni'mah. فقد اعتذر الله إليكم بحجج مسفرة ظاهرة وكتب بارزة العذر وضحت. Sorry, وضحت. Remember that Allah Azza wa Jal has exhausted the excuses before you. There are clear arguments for you, and there's a book, a kitab, barizatil udr, which has open and is bright, and it's there for you. But the first part's our definition. Zuhud is to have short desires, to shorten them yourself, to keep away from that which is prohibited, and to be thankful for what you receive. Now, these are things for the soul, not for the body. The body might want the opposite. The body wants to do more haram, to have lengthy desires, and to not necessarily be thankful, but to just keep attaining more and more and more. But the soul doesn't want that. Now we're starting to see what the soul looks like. If you imagine a graph, and I can't share it now, a graph on which the x-axis has desires and the y-axis has the benefit of abstaining. The more the desire you have for something, the greater benefit you have in not doing it, from the perspective of the soul. Now, the Imam, in a different saying, in saying 439, Hadith 439, gives another definition, but he adds to it. He says, وقال عليه السلام, الزهد كلها بين الكلمتين من القرآن. Zuhud is, if you want to know what it is, it's contained within these two expressions in the Quran. قال الله عز وجل, Allah says, بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم, لكي لا تأسوا على ما فاتكم ولا تفرحوا بما أتاكم. MashaAllah, it's beautiful. It's when what you don't get does not distress you, what escapes you does not distress you, and you are not overjoyous when you receive something. That's zuhd. And the Imam says, فَمَنْ لَمْ يَعْسَ عَلَى مَاذِي, the one who doesn't receive something, they don't grieve anymore. وَلَمْ يَفْرَهُ بِالَّتِي, and the one who gets something, they don't become proud because that they've got something. أَخَذَ الزَّاهِدُ بِطَرَفَيْهِ, they've now got zuhud from two sides. When you lose something, you're not worried. When you get something, you don't feel proud. For the Imam, your soul is like this. It shouldn't react in this way to physical pleasure where you want something, you don't want something. No, the soul is far away from physical pleasure, and it is detached from that which makes the body happy. And now in step 2, you're starting to see two different things, what my body wants and what my soul wants. Let me give an example of this verse of Quran where Allah says that when you don't get something, it doesn't distress you. When you get something, it doesn't make you happy. This is an example I really like from one of the stories of Eastern mythology. There was a farmer, and the farmer lives, I guess, in a farm somewhere in Nepal or northern China. And he has a son, he has a horse, he hasn't got that much in his life. Maybe you guys have heard of him, but he's got very little. And one day, his horse, his only horse, jumps and rides into the wild. And so all of the other farmers come to him and say to him, well, this is bad news. I mean, you've lost your only horse, which was your entire livelihood, and you've lost him. And he says, maybe. The next day, that same horse bolts over the fence and returns, but with it comes with an entire collection of other horses which were wild and have now entered into his very property. So now he has the most horses, and for a farmer, that is your entire livelihood. So now they say to him, well, now, this is good news. Now you have the most horses in the farm. And he replies, maybe. Okay. The next day, he sends his son to ride on one of the horses to tame it, because it was wild, so that it can now be used to carry livestock and to farm. But when his son climbs on that horse, he falls and he breaks his leg. Now, if you think that a horse is valuable for a person's livelihood in that era, imagine a young, healthy son. So all the people come to him and say to him, your son has been injured, he's broken his leg, and he cannot work in your farm. This is bad. And as you can imagine, he replies, maybe. The next day, the army are traveling through this town, looking for young men to conscript to fight in the war. And they see this young man with a broken leg and say, well, his leg is broken, he can stay, he's not going to go and fight and presumably die in the front line. So again, all of the townspeople come to him and they say to him, surely this is good news, your son is not going to fight. And he replies, who can imagine what he replies? Maybe. Maybe. This man expresses a parable of Zuhd in a different tradition, not the Islamic tradition, which is when good news comes towards him, it doesn't make him proud. And when bad things happen to him, he doesn't interpret them as negative towards him. His mentality for both of them is maybe. This is to some degree similar to the definition of Zuhd the Imam gives in Nahjal Balagha. It is in the Imam's words, so there's a little bit different. It is when you don't grieve for what you miss and you don't revel in what you acquire. So, for example, if you lose a horse, you don't grieve. You lose your son, you don't grieve. If you acquire wealth, you don't celebrate. If you acquire an opportunity, you don't celebrate. You keep it a healthy level of abstinence. And this is zuhd, to abstain from that which your soul does not find pleasure in. So that is the second step. Any questions, any comments? Does it make sense to you guys? Zara, you have a question? Please go ahead. So presumably this would apply for worldly things. Do you mean abstaining and the benefit of it specifically? But different rule for spiritual gains. Yes. Yes, good. If you live only for this world, right, just for this world, this wouldn't apply to you. You'd be the one who would be celebrating for everything you get and grieving for what you lose because you measure everything based on its material value, if that was the way that you live. But like you mentioned, if you believe in spirituality, you're looking at everything from a very different perspective. So it's different. You see the world differently. And you even decide to abstain and gain from it in a different way because you're thinking of a different goal, which is immaterial, not material. So like I mentioned, Sister Zahra, in the second level of development, your soul realizes its pleasure is not the same as the pleasure of the body. So that's why they're different. They're different types of pleasure. Does that make sense? No problem. I'm glad I could clarify it. Any other questions or comments about this stage, about stage 2? Okay, step 3 now. So far, you realize that your soul doesn't like physical pleasure anymore. Said Hashim, this sermon was from Sermon 81 I just mentioned, and Hadith number 439. We've not come to the sermon of the reading, but that's the references. Sermon 81 is about qasr al-amal, and 439 is the verse of Quran of Surah 57, verse 23. No problem at all. Okay, I can move on. Okay, I think right. So now step 3. And now you identify areas where the pleasure of the body conflicts with the pleasure of the soul, right? So like you said, Zahra, you see they're not the same thing. And now you become indifferent to those pleasures. So zuhd in its technical form means indifference or to not care about something. And now you decide for those things where there's a conflict, I don't care about those things anymore. And as Shaykh Mutahari explains, now you become more free. You become free in the attachments you make and you don't make. You no longer have a raghba. Raghba is attraction, and you start feeling yourself not wanting or needing excess pleasure. Like you don't want that anymore. You start choosing the spiritual pleasures over the physical pleasures when there is a conflict. Just so I know you guys get it, can anyone mention a point where you think they could conflict between what your body wants and what your soul wants? Can anyone give an example of that? Where maybe the body has a certain pleasure, which if it got it, it would be at the cost of what is beneficial for the souls to enjoy. Sleep versus Salat al-Layl. Beautiful example, Sister Zahra, beautiful example. The body wants to sleep, the soul wants to talk to God. And the place they want is the same time, the night. And now you choose, do I give the night to sleep or the night to Salat al-Layl? A really good example, sister. I'm glad you mentioned that. So that means, according to that, to the third point, you now choose to wake up for Salat al-Layl rather than sleep because you notice it's a point of pressure, a point of tension between the two, and you know what you want. You want the spiritual gains instead. Good. Nice. Okay. Step 4. In these moments, you gradually learn to prioritize the soul. Now, by this, what we mean is you are now prioritizing it in more of a lifestyle. It's not just one or two choices. You are prioritizing it in your general decision making. You're choosing pleasure for the soul over pleasure for the body. Okay. This is a more sustained, a more lasting happiness. This is the real happiness, and it's true and it's honest, and it lasts for much longer than the pleasure of this world. We have hadith from the Imam Nahjal Balagha in hadith 100 and something. I haven't written it down, but I remember reading it, where he says these actions are not the same. The sin which you do, of which the pleasure you wanted passes, but the good deed you do in which the hardship passes. You see, now you're prepared to do something hard, but something else lasts, which is the rewards lasts. Whereas when you do a sin, the pleasure you got, it comes and it goes. It's so temporary. This is a more lasting happiness. And the way to get this happiness, this true, lasting, sustainable internal peace, is to have less, because you're now abstaining. You're not taking those things which the body wants, which stop you getting from what your soul wants. That's one of our companions, Abu Sa'd al-Khudri, says, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he lived with the minimum pleasures in his life, the least amount that you could imagine. And this is widespread. In Sermon 160, Imam Ali Islam gives the example of a number of prophets and then his own example about how they treated dunya. Just listen to how he describes Jesus. He says, if you desire, I will tell you about Isa ibn Maryam. He used a stone for a pillow. He put on coarse clothes and ate rough food. His condiment was hunger. His lamp at the night was the moon. His shade during the winter was the whole expanse of the earth, east and west. His fruits and flowers were only those which grew on the earth for the cattle. He had no wife to allure him. He had no son to give him grief, no wealth to deviate his attention, no greed to disgrace him. And his 2 feet were his conveyance, and his 2 hands were his servants. The simple life. You live off this ground. You live off nature. You don't need many, many things for happiness. Everything that you have is around you in this world. If anything, Zuhd, in its true sense, is to return to nature. Is to go back to where you came from. Is to go back to this world. And Nabi Isa's example, look at how simple he lived. And Imam Ali Islam gives an example of a number of prophets. He mentions Prophet Musa. He says he ate so much green that you could see it in his stomach from how thin he was. I actually think for other reasons, Nabi Musa might be being a vegan. Like, I genuinely think that might be the case. But look at this example. So he just ate that which was around him on the ground, and it gave him pleasure. At the end, the Imam gives his own example, right? He says, he gives an example of himself where he says, in the end of the sermon, وَاللَّهُ لَقَدْ رَقَعَتْ مَدْرَعَتِي هَذِهِ حَتَّى أَسْتَحَيْتُ مِنَ الرَّاقِعَهَا. He says, I have so many patches in my khamis, in my body, in my clothing, that I'm now shy to go to the man who will fix them, the patch worker. وَلَقَدْ قَالَ لِي, and someone once said to me, قائل ألا تنبدها ألا تنبدها, why don't you just replace it? فقلت أغرب عني, I said to him, get away from me. فعند الصباح يحمد قوم السرة. It's only in the morning that people realize the advantage of the night. So I have so many patches in my body, like my shirt is so my patches, I'm shy to get it fixed. I get that part. But the next part, even I wasn't sure. I messaged Sheikh Mehdi Rastani he's doing a course on Nahjal Balagha, and sometimes we exchange a hadith. And I messaged this and I said, Sheikh, I really don't get this. I've been thinking about it for ages and I don't get it. And he's left it on red. So maybe he's thinking about it too. And imagine, I really don't know what the Imam is trying to say. Maybe you have some ideas. This part especially. Someone said to me, take it off. And I said, get away from it. Like, I'm not going to do that. This line, فَعِنْدَ الصَّبَاحٍ يَحْمَدُهُ قَوْمُ السَّرَّةِ. It's only in the morning that the people realize the advantage of the night. What does the Imam mean here? If any of you, by the way, have any ideas, please do share. But it's amazing what he's trying to say. Any ideas what he means when he says, after this example of the shirt, it's only in the morning that you realize the benefit of the journey of the night? Honestly, I don't know. I was thinking maybe it means like,
As
I don't know, like
sorry.
if like when you have gone on a journey and maybe you've stepped through the night, or if you've made lots of gains during the night, in the morning you see with light where you were yesterday, where you are today, you see the progress, and then you're happy for the journey you did through the night. Or maybe, for example, maybe it's like you only realize in the morning how much progress you did in the night, because now you feel different in the morning, or you see something different, like you realize the benefit. This is how they might be referring to the cover of night or the darkness. Yes, that's example. Layl is the example given. But I think,
And
I don't know. Sid Hashim, you got any ideas?
I was gonna say
But I
possibly.
can't hear you.
So
Can you speak a little bit closer to the mic, inshallah?
okay.
Yallah.
Yeah, I think possibly the example of the day is the example of life. Um, so maybe he's referring to the true life, the next life. That it will quickly come,
Yeah.
and the morning will come, and the night maybe refers to the state where most people are in ghafla, or the state of most people where most people are asleep, or possibly even the state where it's more about ibadah and actually um, worshipping more and more Allah.
Yeah. So and then um the only one who will realize why he's tearing his shirt and wants to keep wearing is the one who like is doing that ibadah, who's engaged in those activities. Like, they get it, and you'll only get that once you've gone through the worship of the night. In the morning, you'll reflect and understand why it was worth it. Why should I be wearing these clothes? Like, you've got to be someone engaged in ibadah basically to get it. If that's the point that I get from your point, yeah, maybe like see, I'm saying maybe now from the story of the farmer. I don't know. I just know there is some depth to this line, the way it's structured, the words he uses, and the timing of it. It just seems no, I got a message. I thought it'd be an answer about the hadith. It just seems strange. I don't know. Anyone got any other thoughts to add about that particular point before we move on? Okay, so if you want to think about it, it's at the end of Sermon 160. It's not part of the book club to read this for the book club, but you can read it if you wish. Anyway, step 4. In these moments, you gradually learn to prioritize the soul. You choose the soul. Okay. Step 5. The simple life that you live, it now reduces your attachment to the ego. Athara. You no longer have that attachment to your ego anymore of what I want. And because of this, the Zahid, the one who abstains, becomes more sensitive to the pain of others. You start to have altruism, al-ithar, which comes from the same root, by the way. Mainly because now you're no longer looking at things about yourself and, me. When you see someone else, you can see them for what they are more clearly, because you're not looking at them from how are they better than me. I'm no longer the measure or metric of another person's value. I'm not looking at you in terms of you're used to me. I'm not looking at you in terms of am I better than you or worse than you. It's not like that. I'm working against the ego where I don't see it anymore. And what that means is I can see you for you. And if I go further, it means when you're in pain, I see that pain and I'm willing to go through pain myself for you because I'm not the priority anymore. Think of Ahlul Bayt, how many examples we have from them in which they gave all of their wealth away, Imam al-Hassan, or Ahlul Bayt in the Quran, for example, where the person came and knocked on the door 3 times and they gave the wealth away. And they were hungry. That hunger was worth it because they were no longer subject to their ego, because they'd abstained to a high level. We can be like this. We can be like this. There's an example from Quran about people like us who are like this. In the example of the Ansar and the Muhajirun, in Surah 59, verse 9, Allah says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَالَّذِينَ تَبَوَّأُوا الدَّارُ وَالْإِيمَانُ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ يحبون من حاجر إليه ولا يجدون في صدورهم جاحة مما أوتوا ويؤثرون على أنفسهم. This line, that in terms of the muhajir, when the Ansar, when the muhajir came to them, when those in the migration came to him, يحبون من حاجر إليه, they had muhabba, love for those who came on that journey towards them. They had love for them. That's someone else who's gone through the difficult journey of leaving their home to come to the Dar al-Islam, the place of the Prophet. And these guys had love in their hearts for them, not just love. And fi sturihim, inside of their hearts, they had no jealousy, none of that in their hearts. And the Imam mentioned in Nahjal Balagha that jealousy is the greed, and greed, he meant specifically, is the most eternal suffering. Raqun mubaddan. It is the most eternal suffering you can have. Greed. They didn't have that. They started to feel light for one another and have love for one another. You only get to that level of altruism, we have love for one another and a true sincere love, when I'm no longer putting myself in front of my eyes and you. Like, I'm not putting me there. Take that away and the pleasure which my body was enjoying, and now I can experience you for who you are. And crucially, if you're in pain, I see that pain, I'm more sensitive to it. The hearts of the Zahid, the one who abstains, is soft. So they can't run away and hide in the cave. They have to be around people. But it's true, they will feel sad and they will feel pain when they see suffering around them. That's the 5th level. Now, the 6th level is we come to our sermon. Before I get there, has anyone got any points I'd like to make about this sermon so far or this stage? Are we good? So we get it, right? We went from my body's pleasure to my soul exists, my soul's pleasure. I'm going to start gradually giving my soul more. I'm going to prioritize my soul. I'm going to make it a habit. And when I make it a habit, I'm going to stop putting my ego as a priority. And my ego sheds away. I'll start feeling the pain of others. And that's how we've got there so far. If you allow me, I'll go to stage 6. Okay. Now you feel responsible for the poor. So you want to share in their pain and improve society for their sake. You see how we got here? We didn't get to you now retreat. No, now you feel people more and you want to do something about it. This deen is action. And the thing and it's that sensitivity which you have because of the work you've done to your heart that now makes you want to help. Now we come to Sermon 209, in which the Imam goes to the house of Ala bin Ziyad al-Harith, and he sees he's got this massive house. Now, what did we say, by the way? You start wanting to be responsible for other people. He sees this big house of his companion, right? And this is the sermon which we were looking at. And he says to him, ما كنت تصنع بسعة هذه الدار في الدنيا. This house, this vast house, what will you do it in this world? What use will it give it to you? أنت إليها في آخرتي كنت أحوج. What you need is the house in the hereafter. Now, if you want to take it with you, if you want to take this big house that you have with you to akhirah, إن شئت بلغت بها الآخرة, if you want to take this to akhirah with you, what should you do? تقري فيها الضيف, entertain your house with guests. وتصل فيما الرحم, and use it to repair and to be regardful of your kins, of those who you have rahm upon, your close ones. وتطلع منها الحقوق مطالعها, and use it to discharge all of your obligations that you have, all of your حقوق that you have. فإذا أنت, if you do this, قد بلغت بها الآخرة. If you do this, you'd be able to take this vast house, or ala, with you to akhirah. Now, here's the thing. If you do have something in this world, you start using it for people, and that makes it worth going to akhirah. That makes it useful for your journey, the journey of the Zahid. So what you're doing is you're abstaining from attachment to it. And by using it for the sake of others, it becomes a source of worship for you. What are the 3 examples that we were given? Entertain guests, people. Be regarding of your kin, of your family, people. And fulfilling your obligations, your huquq, which can include silatul rahim, or can include your huquq to your neighbors, to your family, to your friends in your homes, fi buyutikum. People. Somehow the path of the one who abstains leads to other people. And it makes sense because this dunya, this world, is linked to akhirah. And we've got to somehow use this world to go to akhirah. Actually, Mutahari says it's like 2 sides of the same fabric. The same reality, but there's 2 sides of them. And we need to be thinking about taking provision to the next world. And somehow people help us in that journey. A verse of Quran about this, Surah 33, verse 4, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, مَا جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لِرَجُلٍ مِّن قَلْبَيْنِ فِي جَوْفٍ. Allah has not assigned for any man, for any person, 2 hearts in one breast, in one chest. There's not 2 qalbayn, there's not 2 hearts. Meaning what? Meaning, as our Prophet says, your heart cannot contain love for Allah and dunya in the same heart. So in your one chest, you have to choose. Do I want this dunya or this akhirah? And if you choose this dunya, the people you interact with are for this dunya. But if you choose akhirah, you'll find yourselves wanting to help other people, be close to other people, and your heart will be more inclined towards them. Our 6th Imam says in Hadith al-Kafi that the heart, the reason why we have zuhd is to purify the heart and empty it for akhirah. That's the point of it. That's its purpose. And you can't do that without people. You need people for that journey. So to abstain is to choose how to interact with people. I'll give you one more example on this. In letter 45 of the Nahjal Balagha, the Imam is writing to one of his governors of Basra. Uthman bin Hunayf al-Ansari. And Uthman bin Hunayf has been invited to a large gathering where there's lots of food, a big banquet. Imam Hizbayr, and he's not happy about it. And he writes to him, and in that very lengthy letter, he says to him that I am not Amir al-Mu'mineen unless I feel the sensation of the poor, unless I share their distress. How can I eat the best food when I know there's someone starving in Yamama? How can I go to sleep full when I know there are people whose stomachs are hurting and their livers are burning? Like, how can I taste that pleasure? So for the Imam, his own worship is linked with feeling the sensation of others' poverty. Now, as Shaykh Mutahri says, in later Imams, where there was more wealth around, this approach wasn't as needed in some examples, but it is needed here to make an example to the people that your journey is not complete without going with the mustad'afin, with those who are poor. Okay. I want to go to the next part of the sermon. Before I do, are there any questions on this point or about this, what the Imam has just said, or any reflections about this part of the sermon? Because you guys might have read it and had any thoughts. Okay. So then, after this, فقال له على says to him, يا أمير المؤمنين أشكو إليك أخي عاصم بن زياد. I have a complaint to you about my brother Asim bin Ziyad. I want to make a complaint to you. قال وما له. Imam says, what is it? Tell me. قال لبس عباءتي وتخلى من الدنيا. And he wears woolen clothing and he's turned away from this world. He no longer wants it. Based on what the Imam says, he replies to him, our companion, our friend Asim, he no longer wants this world and he wears woolen clothing. So the Imam replied, فلما جاء قال يا عدي نفسي. He says, oh enemy of yourself, you're an enemy of yourself. لقد استحامي بك الخبيث, and you've been misguided by the one who's khabith, يعني by Iblis. أما رحمت أهلك وولدك. Why don't you have mercy or pity on your wife and your family by abstaining from them in this way, by going away from them? أثر الله أحل لك الطيبات. Do you believe that you can do something which Allah has not do something which Allah has made lawful for you? وهو يكره أن تأخذها. أنت أحوان على الله من ذلك. Are you too unimportant? You think Allah is going to dislike you if you stop doing halal? Are you so unimportant? You're too unimportant. Allah is not going to dislike you anymore. So the person says, hold on a second, يا أمير المؤمنين. وقال يا Allah says, oh Ali, هذا أنت في خشون ملبسك وخشوبة مالك واكلك. Mom, you do the same thing. You wear coarse dressing. You eat rough food. Like you're doing the same thing which is being said. And says, وقال ويحك. Woe be to you. إني لست كانت. I'm not you. I'm not the same as you. إن الله تعالى فرض على الأئمة العدل أن يقدروا أنفسهم بضعفة الناس كيلا يتبين بالفقر فقراء. Allah Azza wa Jal has made the obligation I farad on me, on your leader, to maintain myself at the level of the lowest people min nas, of the people, so that the faqir do not complain of their faqra, of their poverty. So I'm not like you. Kanat alayya, I'm not the same as you. Don't compare me to them. But the question does come, right? Why not go so far in this abstinence where you skip section 5, where you're thinking about the people and you focus so much on yourself, where I need to worship Allah, I need this relationship, this journey with God, and family and friends, and like they're not my priority anymore. For the example of Assam, who Allah says, but I want to complain about you. He's not going to his wife anymore. His kids don't see him. He's no longer around. He's left this dunya. He lives away and separate from us now. What about him? And the Imam says that Shaitan has misguided him. Why are you not doing something which is halal on you? Now, we'll come to the response later, but this point about don't go too far, okay? In Islam, we don't believe in monasticism, as there are in the Christian tradition, for example, and even to some extent in the Buddhist and Hindu traditions, where one part of your spiritual journey is to abstain from that which is halal in terms of physical pleasures. So being around your family, having a livelihood, having a wife or a husband, having children, physical pleasure, sexual pleasure, all these things have a place in the Islamic journey of spirituality. They have their own huquq. We don't believe that these things. In fact, if anything, if you think about it, what the complaint is, what he's really saying is he's not having hygiene and he's not having sanitation because he's not focusing on his family and his friends and his wife anymore. He's not having presence of mind. He's not being around, having time with them. He's not playing with his kids. That's the extent of the complaint. And these are all basic spiritual self-care, which is part of our religion. It's part of our faith. And he's not doing those things. And that's why he's complaining. Now, crucially, in Islam, we don't believe in Rahbaniyya, the monasticism. And our Prophet has said, when people like this came to him, because if you imagine at the time of the Prophet, there were people who were known as Ahlus Sufra, the people who would abstain and they would live and they would wear this woolen clothing and this coarse materials, and they wouldn't interact and they'd dress differently. And the Prophet would say, I am your Prophet and I don't do this. I'm not like this where I am, choosing a life of complete destitution and begging voluntarily. I'm not choosing that as part of my spiritual journey. So why are you, if I'm your Prophet and I'm not doing those things? Now, but Imam, what about you? Look, all the stories we've heard. Imam, you are the one who stands for hours praying as if you have lost a child, who wears the most woolen clothing, who, has shoes made of leaves, who has woolen cloth, who doesn't even be able to break bread. What about you, Ya Imam? Now, when the Imam says, I'm not like you, what do you think he means by that? When I said the example of where he says that I'm being given a certain role, I've been given a certain responsibility, that I need to do. What do you think the Imam is thinking about this world, this dunya, when he knows it's harmful and he has a special role? So what I'm really asking all of you is, what is the mentality of Ali bin Abi Talib about this dunya based on this narration? How do you think Ali looks at the world and the pleasures of this world in his role? Yeah, he's an imam now, and he has responsibilities as an imam, right? But he's still that same Ali who we hear a hadith about, that he doesn't want this world, doesn't want those things. But how can he do both things? Where he, he's an example to us to follow, right? We have to follow him, but he's doing something which doesn't apply to us, where he's the imam and he's abstaining and he's doing all these poor things, and he's telling us not to do it. Does that make sense? Who would like to, answer how it's possible the imam can be a role model for us, and at the same time, we're not meant to follow him in this regard? Does it make sense? It's a very fine point. If you get it, like I very would appreciate it very much. So somebody has mentioned brother or sister Mahali. I'm not sure which one. My apologies. Imam understands that he has a responsibility as the leader, and so he has to reflect the poorest of a society in his lifestyle. Good. So his leadership is the key, right? He needs to have a certain role and reflect poverty. Good. Sister Zahra has added, Imam Ali's outlook on the world has not changed. It's just that his role in society has changed. And therefore, that's how these specific actions play out. Good. I think combined, you're making a similar point. It's a role he's taking. And the specific role is reflect the poorest situation in society. Okay, good. Now I go one further. How do we learn about that? Me and you are not the imams. He actually says the role about him is, إن الله تعالى فرضا على أئمة العدل. It's a fard on the adil imam, the just imam, the adil imam. It's on them only. They have to feel the poverty of the poor. How do they apply to me and you? Why is this relevant to us if the imam has to do these things? That's the real question. Like, what do we take from the imam's role? I get his outlook's not changed. I get him. Thank you to the combined work of brother of Mehlan, Sister Zahra. What about me? What do I learn from the imam's, fulfilling his role in this way? Sister has added something, but then said however. So I want to hear what the however is before I read it. Okay, I'll start. I don't want to give any pressure for typing. Our soul set, like our mindset, our soul set should not change in the, i.e., the way we see the world can be the way Imam Ali sees the world. However, if we are to have a different role in the world, then this may require us to modulate our specific actions and behavior. Love the use of the word modulate, by the way, but good. So I get Imam's default. His default is this. It's this level of poverty. Like he wants to feel the sensation of the poor, truly. But it's because of the role that he allows himself to behave in this way whilst not advocating it for others. It's the role which is the advice. The role is not the feeling. The feeling is his. What's not his and what's for us is the different roles that we have. But like you've said, if we have different roles, we have to be able to regulate and change our behavior. Thank you. Because the example I wanted to give was the example of Imam Rida alayhi salam. Now, Imam Rida is living in a very different time where he's in a position of authority, in that he's in Banu Abbas and they've given a role in the government. He's wearing nice clothes. He's wearing good clothes. And interestingly, his companions, one of them says to him, "You are the Imam. We followed Ali ibn Abi Talib, who is like wearing this, this coarse clothing. He's such a humble life. And you are wearing gold and, not gold, but like fine clothing. Not gold, good clothing. How is this allowed?" And the Imam says, first of all, look at this. He opens it up and he sees that inside he's wearing coarse wool, thick and uncomfortable. But on the outside, he's covered up with a layer of nice clothing. So he says, do you see now that for me, I wear it this way to remind myself and humble myself before Allah. It links to hadith the Imam says, which I'll come through. But for the rich, I want to encourage them to worship as well. I want to feel the sensation of the poor just as I encourage the wealthy to follow this religion. Imam Ali has a similar answer where he says, he's asked, why do you wear these rough clothing? And he says, to keep my heart humble. And so that my duty, he says, is to feel this feeling of the poverty, but also to not let the rich rise up against the poor, saying this religion is the religion of the poor people. So that's why I have to balance the two of them. Now, in the Shaykh Mutahri says, for the Holy Prophet and the Imam, it was a time of poverty in Medina. But for the late Imams, it wasn't. And like you said, Zahra, your approach to this world should be so dynamic that when the situation changes around you, you can change your role. So Imam Rida alayhi salam can apply on his clothing that very beautiful exterior, but the interior remains the same. Does it make sense? That's actually what I wanted to get you, but I thought there'd be a few other people mentioned that point, but we are, as usual, alhamdulillah, benefiting from Sister Zahra. In Sermon 103, Hadith 103 that I mentioned, the Imam is seen clothing with patches and which are rough, and he's pointed out to him, and he says, this is what my heart fears. My mind feels humble when I wear these poor clothes and other believers emulate it. But certainly in this dunya, this world, there are two enemies next to each other. And there are two paths in different directions. Now, whoever wants this world and loves it, these are two different enemies of one another. They're like the East and the West. And if the walker gets near them and gets near me, he gets further from the other. If he comes on my path, he goes further from the other path. After all, they are like two different wives, is the example that he gives. They are not the same. Meaning that if you choose this, if you choose the feeling of the soul, you are walking a very specific path towards Allah Azza wa Jal with the Imam. And if you choose the other, you're well within your right to wear nice clothing and to experience and enjoy that. And you're in a different journey. But the point is, you can even look good and have nice clothing and be on the path of Imam Ali alayhi salam if your mentality is that of abstinence, where you're wearing it for a very particular purpose. For example, to appeal to those who are wealthy to follow this religion, that this Islam is for everyone. Like these kind of roles that we're playing. But your mentality is the most important thing. Now, another point I wanted to mention about how me and you can learn from this is a story. The story is from Ayatollah Bahbani, Wahid Bahbani, who is very well known in the Asuli Akhbari debates in the earlier centuries. In fact, he is one of the scholars who, to some degree, was he was responsible for almost ending the initial Akhbari movement by Astarbadi in Karbala, so that after him, it was so much easier to be an Asuli. It's not really our discussion, but he's very important. One day he sees one of his daughter-in-laws wearing nice clothing. daughter-in-law, not even daughter-in-law. And he says to her that she shouldn't wear these things. Now his son, to defend his wife, says, but hold on a second, father, it's halal. We're allowed to wear these things. We're allowed to wear these clothings. And he mentions the verse of Quran, which is, Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim, قُلْ مَنْ حَرَّمَ زِينَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي أَخْرَجَ لِعِبَادَتِهِ وَطَيِّبَاتِهِ مِنَ الرِّزْقِ. Who, قُل, say, who has forbidden wearing nice clothing, zinat, nice adornments from Allah, which has been produced for goodness and for his servants? It is allowed for them. قُل هي للذين آمنوا الحياة الدنيا خالصة يوم القيامة. These are for those people who believed in this dunya, they had good belief in this world, and they had belief in the akhirah. كذلك نفصل الآيات لقوم يعلمون. These details that we have given, they are signs for those people who understand. But the point is, if you want dunya and akhirah, you're allowed to wear nice clothing. So it sounds like, yeah, but Dad, Quran says we're allowed to wear good clothing. Why are you telling me and my wife not to wear nice clothing? Like, why? And Agha Bahbani replies to that, you don't understand. That's for everyone. Me and you, we are a family whose role it is to guide the people. That's our responsibility. And there are poor people who look to us for guidance. In our behavior, we should not aggregate or cause more pain to the poverty of the poor. We shouldn't make it worse for them, that they look at us and they feel bad about themselves. How can it be that they see religion and they see wealth alongside it? So we have a special responsibility. Here's where it applies to me and you, right? It could be argued that if you want to be a role model for your friends and family, if you reach stage 6, we've mentioned, where you are like that, people will look to you for inspiration. They'll look at you as a ambassador for the path of Imam Ali alayhi salam. They'll look at your decision making, which is the purpose of this book club, the topic that we've chosen, and they'll respect you for your choices. And they'll not just look at your words alone, they'll look at your entire conduct, your behavior, your personality. And you've got to become a sign of this path, not just speak about it. You have to inhibit the behavior you wish to speak about. You have to be the message, to be an ambassador for Ali alayhi salam. Imam wants us that from us. And that means that I have to dress a certain way, whether that's in the fard of wearing hijab for a man or woman, or if that's in my behavior, the places I go to, or if it's somehow related to just general simplicity or modesty. Like, I can't live in such a way that someone looks at me and doesn't think of being a follower of Ahlul Bayt if I've reached this level. Because like we mentioned, the one who abstains from this world doesn't run away from their social responsibility. They become an active member of society for the sake of their imam. That's something we can all think about whether or not I'm embodying that message. And that leads to the last level, section 7 or stage 7, in which you realize this discipline, that the Zahid is the one, the abstain is the one, who draws minimum intake for maximum output. They take in the least, meaning they walk with the least intake. Their spiritual carbon footprint is minimal, but their output, the effect they have on others and the effect they have on akhirah, on their own soul, is big. In the same way, you have livestock and racehorses. If you are having animals, say it's a horse you're preparing for a race, or an animal which you're preparing for slaughter, at some point, you will not let it just graze around and live how it wants and do whatever it wants. It has a very specific purpose. If it's an animal, you give it certain food to make it strong only, and you don't give it food that will make it harmful. If there's a racehorse going for a race, you will make sure it's in the right conditions, so when race day comes, it can go fast. It's not got any excess fat on it. You've made yourself a unit for your goal. Ali looks at himself the same way. Innahu nafsi wa arawad'u bittaqwa. This nafs is mine, he says, and I will tame it. The word arawid was the same way the word used to tame horses. I will tame it with taqwa, with God-fearingness, with piety. I'll tame it like that, meaning I have a very specific purpose. Because I know what I want, I'm changing myself for that goal. And like I mentioned, this person, now you have discipline where you see the whole world as amana from Allah, and you are the Khalifa for it. This whole world is a promise, a trust from God. And now your role and my role is just to take care of it in the way that I can until I leave this world. I don't belong here. I'm not from here. I don't own anything. I don't have an ego. I just have some time on this dunya. And like I mentioned earlier in the in the vast house of this world, any wealth I get, I'm just going to use it and send it towards God. I'm not going to become too attached to it. Stage 7 in this sequence is when you are discharging all your obligations, your responsibilities without over excess attachment. You have your private time with God and you have your faith with other people. Imam says, our believers are those. Actually, this is a hadith related to the followers of the 12th, Imam al-Hujjah al-Qa'im, alayhi salam, when she says, the followers at night, they are worshippers, in the day, they are lions. So they have their time where they are worshipping God and abstaining. They have their nights, but in the days, they are active for each other. They are striving. They are relentless in the truth and in being good to one another. You can trust them. You can believe in them. You can rely on them. And we need both. We need those social responsibilities in order to have that private ibadah. And you need that private ibadah to do the right types of amal when it comes to action, when it comes to activism, to our social responsibilities. You need both. And that closes the sequence of how we went from step 1 to physical pleasures not being enough, and step 7, where now this whole world is just an opportunity for my growth. It's a racetrack for me to run through in my journey to God. Okay, that concludes the initial material I had for today's book club. Are there any questions of anything discussed overall about this journey? Any thoughts anyone would like to share, or any opinions or anything like that? Yeah, what are your thoughts coming to the end of what Zuhd looks like? Who, for example, has something specific that you may have learned, or any questions about this path of abstaining from this dunya for the sake of akhirah? Is it clear? Fatima said, how about when something appears like a spiritual gain, but it's actually worldly? How would you recognize that? Yeah. So this example presumably is Helai, after inshallah, if you want to unmute, you can. Let me just deal with this first. So what this would appear to be, Sister Fatima, presumably is something which looks like it's going to be beneficial for my soul, but really in it is detrimental to my soul and beneficial to the body at the expense of the soul. Like that's the example where we're talking about. So for example, a deed, an amal, which looks like it's going to take me closer to God, but when I do it, it's actually for the ego. We recognize that first of all by looking at niyyah, looking at intention. That is the metric. And we looked at this in the second or third session of moral decision making. It's your intention, which is the beginning point, your heart actually. Now, if you intend good, but the thing is actually it turns out later to be forbidden, you don't get a sin for that. In fact, you get rewards for that, some ulama believe, because your niyyah was good. And even though later you found out, for example, I know you're praying and you think it's time to pray, but later you turn out it wasn't the right time and you got to pray again, fine, but you still get a reward for that first prayer because your intention was right. Even right now, if you intend to do bad, but it turns out later that what you did wasn't even a sin, it was fine. Some ulama believe you still get a sin for that because what makes it bad for you was that you didn't want to follow God. For example, someone told me this is haram, eat it. I'm like, okay, I'm going to eat it. I don't care that it's haram. Turns out later it was actually halal all along. It was, HMC approved. It was fine. It was halal. But I believed it was haram. I believed it was going to be against me. Because of that belief, that tughyan in me, that rebellion in me, I made what would have been allowed for me a sin for me. So like I did that. Similarly, to answer to your question, sister, the metric about gains starts with your intention, right? It starts with your niyyah. That's the first thing. Then I'd say your heart, your qalb. We said earlier, the unit of decision making is your qalb. In one of the sermons we have, one of the sayings we have of Nahjal Balagha, the Imam says that the believers are the ones who when something is close to them, their heart, they choose against it. Yani when there's some, their heart wants something, they don't do it. They feel it in them. You know, you feel that attachment in your heart that I really want something, they don't act on it. That's the believer. So in answer to your question, Sister Fatima, the first thing I would say is look at intention and do I want to gain something spiritually? If yes, and I've done the groundwork, even if it turns out to be a shar'an sin to that degree, I still get some benefit from it. Even if it's not beneficial in the technical way, I intended good. Allah rewards that good intention. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is attachment to your heart. Do you feel yourself attached to something in this world? Even if the label is religion and spirituality, does it feel spiritual? Does it have that feeling in it? And Imam believes and trusts in that feeling to some degree, where he says that the believer, the mu'min, is the one that when their heart is attached to something dunyawi, they go against it. I know that might lead to other questions, but there's that at least, are those 2 points that you might consider things you can pursue? Definitely think about those 2 things, okay? About the intention and about the default attachment of the heart. If you have more questions, Sister Fatima, please do add them, inshallah. Somebody unmuted while we were speaking. Was there a question or comment you wanted to add? I think it was Mihlai. If there was something you wanted to add, feel free to add any thoughts or questions or comments. Definitely. Or anyone else. Oh, that was a mistake. No problem. No problem. But like I said, Fatima, if you have any follow-up questions, please do add them. Let me know if what I said makes sense, or if you know, if those are things you can pursue. If not, you know, tell me what the problem is if I've not addressed it, and I'll be happy to. Was there any other questions or comments from anyone? Reflections about this journey which we just discussed, or things which are not clear, or which you would like more guidance on? If not, that's fine. Just to summarize again, in Nahjal Balagha, Zuhd is considered abstinence or indifference to those things which give benefit to your soul. Abstaining from those things which benefit the body but not the soul. You abstain from them, you don't do those things. Because step 1 is they might be enjoyable, but they're not enough. And step 2 is your soul realizes that these things are not what make it happy. And gradually you start to prioritize the benefit of your soul over your body until soon you find yourself developing habits where you no longer have an ego in the way. And when you reach that level where there's no longer an ego, you naturally want to feel the pain of other people. And you subject yourself to that experience. And as a result of that, you want to help the poor and feel the sensation of the poor. And if you are given a certain role, like the role of leadership, of being an imam, like Islam, or being a scholar, or in general, being an ambassador of this religion, you act according to that role, but in your heart, you no longer identify physical pleasure as what makes you, the real you, happy. And where this ends is with a discipline where continuously you are taking in minimum and you are exhibiting maximum. And that's Zuhd. And that's also Maghrib here in the UK. So thank you so much. I hope this was beneficial for you. We only have 2 more book clubs, Thursday, 8, so 9 and 10, 2 more. In them, let's look at specific social responsibilities which we get from Nahja Balagha, right? So next week, I'd like to look at friendship, and the week after, I want to look at politics to end things. So how do this decision making of doing the right thing lead me naturally to being, next week we'll see, a good friend, and the week after to how I have a political responsibility, and that'll be the last session of this whole book club. So for next week, look at Sermon 23. In Sermon 23, inshallah, we will see this idea of being a good friend and how it comes from being a good decision maker. And the last session is on politics and my role in government, because it was something we wanted to look at. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. Alhamdulillah. Now I will say Eid Mubarak if it's Eid. And remember in dua if it's still Arafah, wherever you are. And inshallah, if you're going to Majalis for Muslim bin Aqil, please remember us in your dua, inshallah. But that's it. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care, inshallah. I will see you next week at this time. And thank you. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
علي ولي الله علي ولي الله علي ولي الله